Can we take Putin at his word that negotiations could potentially be on the table?
Well, really, this was about Vladimir Putin having 2 hours to tell the world his view of history, as he's done many times before, his state of the world, and also his view of the war in Ukraine. And there he was seemingly trying to establish some other narratives, which is to cast Ukraine and the US as the ones as wanting war. And if only they would de-escalate, then he would be willing to negotiate, when in fact he was the one who invaded Ukraine, of course, to start with. What he was suggesting is if the US is willing to stop supply Ukraine with weapons, he may consider negotiating. And he's saying it's Ukraine who doesn't want to talk, and he's obviously ready if needed. So it's upending some of those very well-known narratives around this conflict, its origins and how it's going. But what it tells us is that he's feeling pretty good right now. This war has been going on for 2 years. It shows no signs of stopping. Yes, he failed to take Kiev. Yes, he's failed to take Ukraine, but he's carved out quite a bit of Ukrainian territory, and he's sitting there and he feels like he's in a pretty good position. He's seeing those tensions that are coming in the US Congress over supplying Ukraine with aid. He's seeing those whispers that are starting in Europe and the US about at some point does Ukraine need to negotiate, and he's trying to exploit that a bit.
I'm wondering how much of the U.S. congressional story, this kind of aid that recently just got kicked out of Congress, basically on this kind of budget deal, that's supposed to be a bipartisan deal that ensured that aid, is actually bolstering Putin's ability to make these comments. How much of that is really a function of the last 48 hours?
I think he's certainly going to be watching very carefully what is happening. I think he's going to be emboldened by what is happening in Congress. It's interesting, people have talked about Tucker Carlson potentially being a running mate to Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Tucker Carlson has a high profile in Russia, so it'd be interesting to see whether or not you get some sort of rapprochement. I don't know what that would look like, but it would be interesting. But yeah, I think what is happening in Congress certainly will bolster him. But also just the strength, Chrissy, of the Russian economy. The Russian economy has held up remarkably well, you could argue, given what has been happening with the war and the sanctions and everything else that's been applied. Ros, you can read what he says, but just in terms of the overall tone that we take away, you talk about him sounding reasonably confident. How should we, if we're sitting here kind of trying to judge geopolitical risk, what should be our takeaway from this? That this is a war that's going to be going on for a lot longer? Should that be the takeaway? He talks about ways of de-escalating, but they don't sound viable to me.
Well, with Putin talking at great length again about history, what it shows us is Putin is there to play the long game.
Yeah.
I mean, he's been in power for a long time. He's about to get re-elected, and no one disputes that he's likely to get another term fairly soon. And so he's looking at a long-term trajectory here, and he's saying, well, US presidents, they come and go. Other leaders, they come and go. But I'm just going to sit here, and if I stay in Ukraine for long enough, it sort of becomes an established fact. It's very hard to get his troops back out. And so just by occupying that Ukrainian territory in the south and the east, he's not making significant gains. Yes, his military has suffered horrible, casualties as a result of his invasion, but it becomes harder and harder to get him out again. And then you see those conversations starting. Yeah, the war's been going on for a while. Maybe at some point Ukraine needs to negotiate. Does Ukraine need to agree to allow Russia to keep that territory? And so he's very much looking at the long game.